Welcome back to my channel. My name is Stefan. I'm going to skip the pleasantries because we are getting back into the map making tutorial. So for the first part, we covered continents, we covered islands, and we also covered making the coastline look a little bit more interesting. So without further ado, let's get into the next part here. So here we come back to the map that we first started, and you'll notice so far nothing has been changed, picking up right where we left off. And again, you'll note just using basic mechanical pencil, basic ballpoint pen, and still writing in the convenient notebook for fantasy writers. We'll probably be getting a little bit of use out of this for a while. So for this first part, you notice that we went through, we did our continents, we did our islands, and I talked to you about positive and negative space. So now, and everyone is going to have different strategies when it comes to dealing with water. So granted, this is not the only way, but it is a way that I found that I like. And so first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and start by coloring in the water. Now you notice I'm just going to go lightly. Don't need to do too much. Just putting a little bit of a gray down here. So one of the things that this does is it makes it very clear what is actually water and what is land. Now, it seems obvious because we were doing it from the beginning, but if you had something like this, like you could imagine that this could actually be a continent, that could be a just random lake or sea in there, and then these are lakes, and now suddenly the whole thing is a little bit different because now you've got all these land pieces that are surrounding this great big sea or even ocean. But we want this to be our land, so I'm going to go in and color in this other stuff, and this is going to be water. So if you are first joining me, if for some reason you missed part 1, that will probably be a little bit more exciting. This is the part of the process that's not so exciting. Some people find it rather boring, and I get that. I understand that. So after I go through and just color in these parts, then I'm going to stop the video and jump forward to the next part, because if you don't want to watch me color, that's fair. That's totally fair. But if you do, if you find that calming, relaxing, and you don't mind sticking around with me for a little while, I'm glad to have you. I like having you. And it's one of the other reasons that I'm doing it like this is because I really want to show how long the process actually takes. If you were to go through and say, I want to do my own, and then you get to the stage and it's like, oh boy, that's a whole lot of coloring. I don't know if I necessarily like that. Well, you know what? In your world, you can do whatever you like. If you don't want to color in like this, if you want to leave it more white, that is perfectly fine. In fact, you're going to find that a lot of the black and white maps in books are going to be like that. A lot of the black and white maps are going to be white for a lot of stuff. Everything from the land to the ocean, then possibly even mountains. They might have a little bit of like pure black outline on the mountains. They might have some pure black accents on the mountains. By the way, I'm really excited for when we get into mountains because there are a lot of ways to do those, and so I'm going to show you a few ways because every book has its own style, and one mountain range that you have in there might be perfect for your book, but another mountain range might be perfect for another person's book. Like I said, I want you to have the tools to create the world that you want to create. I don't want you to get bogged down by one specific way of doing things. Yeah, I gotta get a little bit more lead. A little bit more lead. I don't want you to get bogged down, like I said, by doing things one specific way. This is one thing that I also experienced when teaching math. I know. You're getting random stuff now. Well, with math, a lot of times you're taught there is one way to do things, and if you don't get it, sucks to be you. And that's just not nice. That's just not nice. To me, I'm of the mindset that because kids learn differently, it logically follows that sometimes there might be multiple ways to teach something. Case in point, we actually had one situation where there was a topic that a student was learning. They were in trigonometry, which, side note, that's actually one of my favorite classes to teach. I love the math in there. It's a right level of complicated, but you also are doing stuff with it that actually applies to real world. So I like that. But anyways, so he was having a issue with one part of it, and he asked me to explain it, and so I did, and he seemed like he got it. But then I remembered I am more of a geometric thinker at times. I think better when I've got the shape or the picture. I find that it's oftentimes easier to just graph out what's happening when you're having trouble understanding what the formula is supposed to be. Because when I draw a picture, now I can see what's happening, and then it makes sense. So I showed the guy. It's like, sure, here's how to do it mathematically, but if you could just imagine, and then if you draw the picture like this, and then he was like, oh, I see it. That makes sense. So that was a really nice moment because the work was the same. I wasn't telling him to do something too crazy. It was just doing the stuff that he already was, but I put it in terms that make sense. Another thing that I found is sometimes there are some things that just need to be memorized, but other things you just need to know how to apply. And so figuring out the stuff that you need to memorize as opposed to the stuff that you just need to recognize is important as a strategy for math. I really wish that schools would do a lot better with that kind of stuff. There's way too much emphasis on memorization. And I think that memorization is one of the worst things that you can do for students, because not everyone is great at memorizing hundreds of formulas. And no joke, there are like hundreds of formulas just for various things out there. And having to memorize all of them takes up precious brain power. And quite frankly, I don't find it to be helpful. Now, some people are great at memorization, and other people are good enough so they can get by, but a person's success in math should not be how well they can memorize something. In my view, it should be how well they can do the work. Now, if a person can recognize, for example, off the top of their head, that 1 plus 1 equals 2, and 2 plus 2 equals 4, well, you shouldn't have to memorize the process. That's just a simple thing that you should memorize. And it sounds obvious, it sounds basic, but some of those things should be memorized. I also like to recommend, for when people find that they are struggling with math, is to memorize the times tables, because that's information that you're going to constantly use, and wouldn't it be nice to just not struggle over figuring those out? Now, I admit, it's funny because there are some that I find I still have issues with. Case in point, 8 times 4. Well, 8 times 2 is 16. 16 times 2 is 32. Therefore, 8 times 4 is 32. Seems logical. However, for some reason, in my mind, I say, oh, 8 times 4, that equals 24. Well, 8 times 3 is 24. So that one's clearly incorrect. But 8 times 4 equals 32 just sounds wrong for some reason. I can't explain it, but it's one of those ones that when I see it, I just know I've got to kind of be a little bit more careful with, and that's okay. It's not that I can't do the math, it's just that the memorization has somehow skipped a little bit. And in those kind of situations, like I said, I just have to be a little bit more careful. And also, here's another thing that I don't think a lot of teachers do. Just admitting when they make a mistake, I think is fine. I had a lot of really good teachers in my days, both high school and in college. I had a lot of really bad teachers too, though, but unfortunately that's reality. I tried to, I like to not even say I try to forget the bad ones, because as a teacher, suddenly all teachers are now resources for what to do or what not to do. And you can learn sometimes just as much from the bad teachers as you can from the good ones. Because if you've got a bad teacher that doesn't do stuff, and you know that that really does not help at all, then when you go to do your own teaching or instruction or whatever, if you know, well, this clearly was a bad thing, then don't do it. Like the one that I always hated. So this was in one of my college classes, one of my college professors. So he went through and he did a problem. Then he got stuck. Then he looked at his notes and he went, okay, well, the answer is this. And some people will say, oh, that's just being sloppy. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, he's taking a thing that he knows, he's getting the answer, then he's working backwards, and then we'll see how it comes out, blah, blah, blah. No, what he did was he said, so here's the answer, and I know it's right, so we'll move on. And I was floored. I was absolutely floored, because here's this teacher was trying to teach us something that we had not seen before, and he's telling us that he knows it's right. We don't see how it's right. And I basically just wasted a good solid 10 minutes. Now on the flip side, then I had another teacher, and this was my Calculus 3 teacher. And he went through and he did a problem. And this is one of those problems that takes up like 4 board space kind of thing. So yeah, one single problem. It was awesome. So he did this problem, and then he gets to the end and he looks at his notes and he goes, okay, so this problem does not match what my notes say. And so, of course, you wonder, how are they going to approach it? And he goes, so here's what we're going to do. Because we went through, and because I got a different answer for this problem than I did when I went through it before, that means that one of these problems is incorrect. So, and then he went through his notes and he double checked his stuff and goes, all right, pretty sure this one's right. So let's look back here and see where things went different. And believe it or not, he found at the very beginning of the problem, like I'm talking like a few lines into board 1 kind of thing, he had dropped a negative sign. Yeah. A negative sign really does make a difference when it's in the wrong spot. So he found that he had an incorrect negative sign there. And rather than, now bear in mind, this was Calculus 3. So this was not a basic class. This is a professor who kind of should know everything and we should be able to trust and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, all right, well, because I made a mistake, and then he just starts erasing everything basically after the missed negative sign. He says, because we did this problem like this, came out wrong, so I'm going to start over. And it was amazing, because you don't see a lot of teachers that will get to a point and be like, oh man, this is wrong. Usually they'll go on. Well, this guy, he went and he said, all right, we're doing this over again. And he went back, did the problem with the correct negative sign in there, went through, solved it. Then he went back to his notes, checked it, and was like, all right, so this one, now that we went through and we did the work, this matches what I had written originally. So because we've got 2 times of doing something, getting the same answer, that logically follows that this is going to be the right answer, and so I'm confident with this one, and that this other guy, because it was different, this one is the wrong one. So, in summary, I took a couple things away from this. Number one, this teacher cared more that we learned than that he was right. And I respect him so much more than the teacher who said, and I know it's right, so we'll move on. So, teachers, if you're in that same boat, teacher or kids will think less of you if you act high and mighty, but if you accept when you make a mistake and fix it, they'll like it more. Because really, students are trying to learn, Students want to learn, they want to understand. You might not think it, but students genuinely do want to understand what they are learning. Because when they understand, then they do better on tests. If they don't understand, test scores go down. Also, if they don't understand, especially with math, then they give up. And this is a really terrible tragedy. We see a lot of kids that they encounter something like that with math, and maybe they had a really bad teacher a year previous who did not care for them to learn. They just cared for them to get through the material. And so as a result, they maybe got stuck and maybe got to a point where they weren't sure, but they never quite got an answer to be able to move on. And so then they stayed stuck. And everything that they learned from then on was confusing. So I always love those days when I get the pre-algebra classes and they're just starting in on X. And just that concept of here is a symbol that means some number. We're not sure what number, but it means a number. And we're going to treat it as such because I love having those kind of days where I get to just spend time and really focus hard on making sure they understand that concept. I honestly have absolutely no problem taking a little bit more time on something just so that the student is able to understand it. And yeah, I really want to get concepts early, and that way they're well understood. So here we have our fully shaded map. So all the blank part, or the gray part here, this represents our water, and then all the white stuff that represents our land. So as you can see, our islands are still white, our continents are still white, and then we've got our ocean is going to be gray. Now, you might be noticing that here we have this weird kind of streaky situation. Well, I don't really like that. So how about we fix that? So now, in order to fix all of this little stuff like we've got, I bring in this very fancy tool. See, here's what's awesome about this thing. This is a blending tool, but what is it? It is a piece of paper that I ripped off and rolled up. That's it. That's all that it is. But what's really awesome about this particular blending tool is that I'm going to use it to blend in and make those streaks go away, at least to a degree. It's going to keep some of them in there, and that's going to be cool. That's going to be fine. I like texture. I personally like texture, but not everyone is going to. So you can do however much blending you want, and then you can go back in there and put a little bit more pencil down to make it a little more blended. But the whole thing about this, and here's what's cool, you don't even need to have one of these. You can just use your finger. The natural oils on the finger actually lend it really well for blending, but it does make your finger all kind of, marky. Like you can see here, I've got a bunch of little gray stuff on my finger right now just because as I was going along. And you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, you have to draw a certain way. You got to have your hand positioned just so. And I never did that. I always drew like I was writing. And being a lefty, when I go across the page like that, my hand always smears. So it's like, I've dealt with this all my life. It's life now. It's happening. So then I go in with my tool, and you're seeing some of the smear stuff. Well, when I start going, I'm just going to make little circles like that. Just kind of go around. You notice that it really helps to fill in that white stuff. And see here, I'm just going to go like that. Go here like this, and then come around like here. Come in like that. And basically just solidify and make that look a little bit more uniform. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to do the same between my islands. And this is where I recommend having a little tool, because in between your islands, it can get a little bit tricky. Now, bear in mind, they do sell stuff. So like if you go to an art supply store, you can actually get neat little rolled up dudes that are about the size of a crayon, and they're really nice, they're convenient, but again, it's something to pay money for, and you're not always going to have access to them at any time. So I'm a huge fan of giving you the tools that you can do on a regular day-to-day basis. Because here's what's cool. You might be sitting and, you might be sitting down during lunch and you sketch out something really fast, but then you want to shade it. And so you'll have your notebook there, you just rip a little strip, and then you'll have a fancy, convenient blending tool that really is not fancy. So I'm just gonna go around a little bit more. And you're noticing also, so I had the pencil going that way, and so I'm actually running it parallel, or kind of perpendicular to my marks. This is because now I can kind of try to maximize the blending. You still have some of these streaks in here, but it helps to clear it up. And then, of course, if you don't like that, you can always go in circles. Circles are actually ideally suited for this, just because then you have a little bit more of a flowy kind of style. Because again, this is water. Water flows, water moves. Water has currents. Water moves in waves, in whirls, in patterns. Water is amazing. I really do like water. Granted, I kind of have been around water all my life, so to me, water is comforting and soothing. Realistically, I don't see myself living anywhere too far from water, whether it be ocean or lake. Probably ocean if I can, though. would honestly take a really great opportunity, a really great job, or quite frankly, a really fantastic girl to convince me to live elsewhere. I love my home. I love Alaska. What I love too about Alaska is that things are always changing. The weather's always changing, the season's always changing. Right now we're technically in spring, it might be second winter, depending on how the weather feels. But one thing that I hope you're noticing as I'm going along, I'm not spending a whole lot of time inside on the coast area. And there's actually a couple reasons behind that. One, for the tool that I have, that's some very fine detail work. And to a degree, it's really kind of a little bit more work than it's worth. Funny thing about mathematicians, they say, is mathematicians are inherently lazy because they will find the easiest way to do something with the least amount of work and effort. So then you counter that with my artistic standpoint and just saying, you know what, if I want it to look a certain way, I'm gonna do it just because. So I constantly have, you've heard before, there are two wolves living inside you. Whichever one survives is which one you feed. Well, I have two artistic wolves inside of me. One is the mathematical side, the other is the artistic side. I like to think that even though they're irritated with me, they get along, because they come up with some cool ideas. My artistic style is very, very mathematical in a lot of ways. Like when I showed you the cover of the fantasy book, the mathematical side tells me to keep things ordered and just kind of lined up straight because that's how the eye sees. The artistic side says, I want some good color in there. I want to make it pop. Color is awesome. Color is amazing. And the mathematical side also said that all the little Celtic knot design has to happen. The artistic side said, oh, that's cool, let me learn too. So yeah, I like Celtic knot designs. The knot work is really intricate, and you can kind of do whatever you want with that also. You can make big weaves, you can make small weaves. So I really like making Celtic knot designs. And the thing too about that, there are some people that are absolutely amazing, absolutely fantastic. In a lot of ways, I have just the basics, and then I play around with the basics. But I'm still learning new art techniques periodically, because I'm a huge fan of always learning. And when you stop learning, then life gets boring. If you're always learning new things, you're always keeping life interesting, and you never know where something is going to apply itself to other parts of your life. Like, if you learn a new technique in art, you never know how you're going to use that technique in other aspects of your art. Or if you see something that you really like, photography style, you never know how that's going to affect the rest of your photos, because now you have one more tool to play around with, one more way to make things awesome. And really, isn't that what it's all about? Okay, so as you can see, I went through and I blended my ocean, kept things still textured because I like having the texture in there. It makes it look interesting. If it was just all solid gray, I think that would be boring, but I like having a little bit of texture in there. All right, and so that is it as far as my coloring goes. So later on, I'm going to show you how to do some really cool stuff with the coastlines, and then I'm going to show you how to do some cool stuff with mountains. We're going to do some rivers, some lakes. We're just going to really fill this in. But yeah, like I said, I know that not everyone wants to sit and watch just coloring and shading, so I figured I would have that be a separate thing, and then the details for another video. That being said, if you enjoyed this, please make sure to give it a like, and also please subscribe. Ideally, too, you'll share this around to your friends and you'll make me go viral, but you know what? I'll address that another time. So hopefully you got something out of this. Thank you guys very much, and happy creating.